Hi there, everybody, and welcome to Art of Procurement, episode 259, with me, Philip Eidson. Now, whether you are a consultant or a practitioner, it seems like the grass is always greener on the other side. For the consultants among us, you're constantly on the road, you work late hours, and are subject to high expectations from your management team and from the point people on each of your customer accounts. If you're a practitioner, you find yourselves at the mercy of consulting teams that you didn't personally decide to hire. You lack the influence naturally extended to external parties like consultants, and are often left to deal with a lot of the details and the devil in those details once the consultants are flown off to their next engagement. Well, I'm joined today by Mark Richardson. Mark is Head of Procurement, Fleet and Administrative Services at AAA Southern California. Mark is really well qualified to discuss the differences between being a procurement consultant and being a practitioner because he's been both. And then having joined AAA initially as an individual contributor, he now manages the team that were originally his peers. So in this podcast, Mark and we recorded this at ProcureCon in Direct East back in, I think it was March of this year. In the pod, Mark addresses the challenges of one, making the transition from consultant to practitioner, and then secondly, making a transition from being a peer to a leader of that same group. Now, as we go into the podcast, as I often did, I asked Mark if he found procurement or if procurement found him.
You know what, Phil? That's an interesting question that as I'm driving down the 405 freeway in California and I listen to your pod, I often think about how I'd answer that question. So I think absolutely, like many on the show, procurement found me. Mm-hmm. I graduated I started off as a math major in college, switched to a business major because I wanted it to be something more applied.
Yeah.
And then coming out of college, I had a finance major, but I didn't see myself on Wall Street. I didn't see myself doing, investment stuff or portfolio stuff. And I was really looking for a more operational type role.
Yeah.
And, I'd moved to California at the time, Southern California, and started pinging my resume everywhere, as you do at that age, mm-hmm. just graduating. And sure enough, I got a call from what turned out to be a boutique consulting firm, which, taking that role is probably the best decision I've made.
At that entry, like at that first role in consulting, what other kind of stuff were you doing? Was it analytics, spend analysis?
It's funny, even to this day, I still say that, the devil is in the detail, right, mm-hmm. when it comes to procurement, and making sure you understand the different aspects of a spend category is key. So, quite frankly, at that time, it was a lot of data entry. Yeah. Right? It was entering shipping patterns. It was entering refreshments into spreadsheets. And I think the tools and the technologies have obviously developed a lot more these days.
Yeah.
Both within that organization I was with, and then just in general. But I learned a lot through that process. I understood pricing models and how SKU numbers worked and all of the basic stuff. So it was bit of everything.
Yeah, one of the things I kind of worry about is that with technology, I want to be really careful, not to say technology is going to change the world or anything like that, because I do think it's about how we use it. But technology is going to start taking away some of those entry-level jobs, where those were the stepping stones, like the foundational knowledge for so many of us getting into procurement. Mm. I worry kind of what's going to happen when those roles don't exist, because it's hard to jump straight into a more strategic role in procurement. You kind of have to start somewhere. Yeah. If that doesn't exist, where do we pull talent from?
Yeah. My thoughts on that are, and not to discredit myself or anybody else who graduated way back when, but I find the graduates these days are coming out with a completely different skill set. Mm-hmm. Right? They were born with tablets and cell phones in their hands. They know how to utilize technology, how to use that to gain efficiencies. So I think that accounts for a lot of it, that, those roles are just changing. So those folks are coming out of college accustomed to dealing with the technology that exists in the procurement space and able to use it better than I would have been able to at the time. So that's one thing. And I think there's been a lot of discussion around this topic. And at the end of the day, I don't think the robots are going to come and take over everything, mm-hmm. but it's going to be repurposing the roles that we do and be more strategic. That certainly does have an impact when you're earlier on in your career.
Yeah, I know that it's something that you're passionate about, just from our past discussions kind of off mic, is where technology is heading and just kind of exploring it. And I don't think we have crystal balls necessarily, but I'm just interested how do you kind of look from a pragmatic perspective as figuring out where technology is going, and then perhaps how to bring that back into a procurement environment?
Absolutely. I mean, I think spending a few years in consulting bred efficiency into me right from day one. So I'm always looking for ways to bring efficiency to my operation. And then, just being aware, I say to my sourcing consultants, who's kind of our internal name for commodity managers, that all roads lead to technology today, right? So whether that's my person who's focused on marketing, who's focused on HR, IT, they all need to be technologically competent when it comes to negotiating contracts. And that's a word of wisdom I would give to anybody out there, no matter what your category area in today's world. So a lot of it's just that, and the convergence of multiple technologies into the future is something that I think about. Don't get me wrong, there's still a lot of things that and every procurement organization, I think, has some just basic transactional stuff that we still need to get correct. But just having a general awareness as to what's coming will help me deliver appropriate procurement service to my internal stakeholders.
It's an important point about every category now has an element of technology. And before that, I think back to when I was a category lead, in categories such as HR and benefits and professional services. I really had no idea about technology, and I probably had no desire to learn about technology because technology wasn't so pervasive. But then as technology becomes like every service pretty much is delivered on a platform of technology, you have to have that as a foundation. Companies are thinking about it. Is everything now IT? Or do we need IT folks to come and help me as a professional services buyer or a HR buyer when there's an element of IT, or should we as professionals just inherently, that's the baseline now, we all have to understand technology?
Yeah.
I want to talk a little bit about the transition that you took from a consultant to practitioner. A lot of times I think the more typical path is from a practitioner to consultant. First of all, why did, as you're in a consulting environment, why did you then look and think, you know what, I actually would like to go into the practitioner side of things? What were the motivations in wanting to do that as a career choice?
So I think it was a couple of things. I had a fantastic experience as a consultant, entry level role, moving up within an organization that really treated me well, and I learned a lot through that process, how to interact with stakeholders and how to drive results, maybe most importantly. But the transition I made, quite frankly, at the time, I was starting a family. Yeah. So I, in the consulting world, you're on the road a lot. Yeah. Traveling. So that was a prime driver. I mean, I actually laugh. I got offered the role at AAA. I was literally in the hospital having my first child, and I got the call, and they were looking for a decision within 2 days, and I said, I kind of need a week. Having my first got the priority here right now. Yeah, so and the timing just worked out in that regard that I walked in from paternity leave, and then I made that transition. So the travel was one thing. I think just the opportunity to join a big organization, see what type of impact I could make for what is a $6.5 billion organization was exciting, household name. And then, just seeing what I didn't know about the procurement space. And, I find there's been a lot of differences from working internally at an organization compared to the outside delivery model. Yeah. So it was a combination of factors.
So as you made that transition, was there anything that surprised you? The differences between working in a procurement environment as a practitioner versus a consultant?
I think just the additional level of complexity on working internally. Whether it's the contracting process, internal approvals, the risk management process, there's a lot of things that no matter how good you are as a consultant, you just don't get that deep. Right. And so being on the inside and having to, work through risk management, work through legal, work through the vendor risk process to get a deal done, and not just expecting a contract to be signed overnight. Yeah. So that was the biggest challenge, I think, as a consultant. You think, you deliver a final product and the contract comes back executed the next day, but there's a lot of things that go into that internally at a big
and you have a lot
organization.
more. The leverage isn't the right word. I'm not quite sure what the right word is. But as you're a consultant, you're there and you're being paid, and people are a little bit more motivated to do things quicker, or you're getting paid on an outcome, and so again, it kind of speeds up the process. When you're there as an employee, you're not always paid on outcomes. You're paid to perhaps move processes along. You're paid to take meetings, and there's not sometimes the urgency, is there, in coming to decisions and perhaps executing on decisions.
I would say that's true. I've tried my best to maintain that consultant mindset internally, and I try and preach that to my team too. I mean, as I referenced earlier, we actually call my high-level sourcing team strategic sourcing consultants.
Yeah.
For that very reason, is I do see it's more of a consultative type of role as opposed to just managing a commodity.
Yeah.
So I try and maintain that mindset, but you're correct. Ultimately, when you're working for a consulting firm, that is the revenue of the organization that obviously drives a different type of behavior. Do
you feel that changing that naming convention to being a strategic sourcing consultant actually changes how they're seen within the business as well, and the role that they actually are bringing to the business?
Yeah, I'm not going to take the credit for making the change. That change was actually done prior to me stepping into the role, but I liked it, and it actually attracted me. That was the role I actually moved to the organization in before moving up to a leadership role. So I think there's two things. Yeah, I think the consultative aspect is interesting. Has its downsides too. Sometimes my team will get asked, "Are you actually an employee here?
Yeah.
Or are you
an external consultant?"
Yeah. So that sometimes is a bit of a negative, but generally, I like it. And then job posting wise, sometimes it works against you. But
right. Yeah. As somebody's thinking about making the move, into a practitioner side role when they may have been a consultant before, what kind of tips would you give them to actually make that transition a little bit easier?
So I think these tips would apply, across the board for the most part, but I think as a consultant, there's a few things you need to do to be successful, right? You need to be able to build relationships and build relationships quickly. Clearly, you need to get results. You need to have a relatively diverse experience, and it's very important in procurement is the ability to ask questions and listen.
Right.
So I think just taking those core principles that make a good consultant and quite frankly make a good procurement person, and transition them into the practitioner role will put you in a good position.
Yeah, I think just thinking of it as you say, a consultative position, not a showing up and we're procurement. This is what we do. And I've said that a few times in recent episodes of the challenge that brings. In that, do people really have an incentive to work with you? I think it's what you said there about asking questions. Asking questions all the time is so important to do the discovery. I think as a or if you come to it from a consultative perspective, you spend a lot more time on discovery than what you may do otherwise, because maybe you're coming in, you're already assuming without really knowing what the stakeholder needs. I think that's one of the benefits of going through that consultative process.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's a phrase, he who asks the questions has the power. So I know you're asking me questions today, Phil, so maybe maybe you have the power.
Yeah, well, just wait until, I'm in a session that you're in the audience and you can get your own back. So we talked about applying the consultative mindset, generally to procurement. What I'd love to do is get into some specifics. Obviously, you can't share details that are... you've got NDAs in place with suppliers, so I'm not going to ask you about suppliers specifically, but kind of the approach to categories. One of the categories that I think you've had success in is one that's really hard for procurement to make a difference in, and that's in health benefits. And I just wonder if you could share a little bit more about your approach to that category, the outcomes that you're able to drive, and perhaps how thinking differently and taking that consultative approach led to some of those different outcomes.
Yeah, it is an area that we've had some relative success in over the years. I think the approach, it was interesting. Again, I'll credit my predecessor for literally getting me a seat at the table. And my first day in the role at AAA, I was sat in a room with our HR benefits leaders and our external broker, kind of understanding about our benefits plans and our dental plans and how that all works. And, quite frankly, Phil, at that point, this is not an exaggeration. I barely knew the difference between an HMO and a PPO and what that actually meant.
Yeah, being us Brits, we have no idea until you get here, do you? Like, how does this whole system work?
Right.
I'm not even really sure I still know, even though I pay for it all, each month.
Yeah, that's true. I didn't actually think about that. I guess I had two things working against me: being British, and not having to deal with a private healthcare system, and then just not having been in that world. So, it's kind of intimidating. Big category, tens of millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars, and so again, just that ability to be a sponge, to listen, to learn, ask what at the time were probably a lot of silly questions that were completely out of context and wrong, but that really helped me understand kind of the dynamics, and continuing to get that seat at the table, building the relationships with the benefit folks and the external partners. I learned a lot from the organizations, the vendor partners that we've had in that space too, whether that be our broker or whether that be the actual carriers and things like that. So
I think that's an important point to make that we often miss because we are afraid of giving up our hand, to a supplier because we're always thinking about not wanting to share too much information. But it's the value that some of those relationships with your suppliers and what you can gain from that, because they're willing to educate you on the market if it's something that you haven't necessarily bought before. And if you were doing it with more than one provider, so you're getting more of a whole picture, not just one biased view of the world, you can learn so much from your suppliers or from prospects. And I don't think we take advantage of that often enough.
Yeah, it's a strategy I deploy a lot, actually. I don't think it has hurt me to this point. I mean, I look back over my career and I kind of chuckle sometimes that I've negotiated everything from ice cream to school bus routes to car batteries to healthcare, so very diverse. And, that ability to listen to your vendor partners, current incumbent vendors, as well as potential new vendors, obviously those who have more to gain may be willing to help you and share more. But even your incumbents, a good procurement person knows how to expand the pie as opposed to shrinking the pie, right? So, or cutting the pie up. So I think I use that strategy a lot, and I'd encourage others to think about that.
As you think about engaging in categories where you're not necessarily the subject matter expert, there's obviously you need to be able to provide to a stakeholder that you're going to bring some value, or else why would they want to work with you in the first place? I'm just wondering what are some of the things that are tactics or tools that you've utilized, and you can, thinking back to the health benefit example, to really convince the stakeholder that they should be seeing you as a true partner and not just somebody who's here to help them run a process or, be a nuisance and stop them from getting what they want to get.
Yeah. So I think a lot of it is about, understanding what the currency of that stakeholder is, right? What is it that drives them? I read a book a while ago that I've always liked, which was, how to influence somebody without authority. Yeah. And I think that ability to understand what's driving them is key. Making sure that they understand that, they have a day job too, right? Negotiating with vendors, putting contracts in place, generally isn't the main focus of your stakeholders day to day. So emphasizing to them that, hey, I want you to be able to focus on, managing our HR population and our employees, and let me kind of take this burden from you, I guess, and get through the process is something that I've used a lot.
So early in the conversation, you mentioned the fact that you came into AAA at the consultant level. You've obviously had the opportunity to step up now into the leadership role for the team. That's often a really difficult step to take. I wonder if you could share, because a lot of us faced that. It was something that I faced as well in my career, and I'm not sure how well I did with that step up, to be honest with you. Some of your experiences in actually being able to take that step from an individual contributor to a team leader, but leading the folks that were your peers before. How have you been able to do that? Or what are some of the approaches that you've taken to take that step up?
Yeah, I think, first of all, compliments to my team. They really helped me through that process, particularly on the transactional side of the business, which I can get into in a second. I think, my transition, quite frankly, started prior to me officially being put into that role, which I think, I think there's a general perception that you should be thinking about that next role and doing some of the duties of that next role before you're officially put into that role. So I was getting myself involved in some projects that weren't really in my realm of responsibility that positioned me somewhat well to learn.
As it felt like a natural progression even amongst the team around you.
A little bit, and I had good peers around me. The leader I was reporting to was staying with the organization, so that helped me. She moved into a different role within the organization to get some other experience. So I think just knowing that she was still around helped that transition. Having a great team helped with that, but it wasn't easy. My whole background was in strategic sourcing. So I knew how to negotiate a deal like the best of them. But it was a whole new world to me, even though I've been somewhat exposed to the transactional side. I mean, again, another thing I say to people is I barely even really knew what a PO looked like, right? Like, because I wasn't dealing with that side of the business. So I had a lot to learn there, and I still do. I mean, I'm 3 years in now, and sometimes I look back over 3 years and think, wow, what have you actually achieved in those 3 years? And that's probably an exaggeration because we have got a lot of good things done and we've got a good plan going forward, but a lot of that was just learning. And the team, I probably drove them crazy the first 6 months to a year because I was asking again a lot of questions on how does this work. Where
I found it hard was it's hard not to, I probably made a mistake the first time I did this, it's almost like you want to be friends still with everybody. And so, but I'm always really big on culture. So I want everybody to be in an environment where they feel comfortable just telling me whatever they want to tell me. I don't really want to create a distance between me and my team, but it's hard to kind of create that space where sometimes you need it. And I think I struggled with that, to be honest, as I made the first step up. When I took the first role, like leadership role, there was no preparation, within my organization for how you did it. So I think I binge read like every How to Be a Manager book that was going and listened to every podcast I could put my hands on and things. Because nothing, I think, really fully prepares you for it, even though you think that you're prepared for it. And what you said then about learning new categories, like you suddenly, like I was never involved in the IT category as an individual contributor. It was always outsourcing, BPO, HR services. I did direct stuff, never did anything in IT. And all of a sudden you're managing a team where you have categories you know nothing about. And that was really tough for me because you're having to have those intelligent conversations with the CIO about IT, for me anyway, without having a clue what was going on. And so it's a really steep learning curve, I think. You kind of just want to create the environment where people give you a little bit of leeway as you're learning and growing in the role.
And I'm pretty sure they did. I think they gave me a lot of leeway in the time frame, but thankfully we came through that.
So one of the things I think you've been really successful in is building new goal structures, like aligning essentially the outcomes that you're delivering as an organization with what the business needs from you, not necessarily just showing up and being procurement, cost savings is everything, this is what we do. How have you kind of approached that and building something that's more of a balanced scorecard?
Yes, I think I've took our previous goal structure and made a couple of tweaks to that over time. I think cost savings is always going to be a key part, savings and avoidance, but most procurement practitioners today recognize that we need to move beyond that as a function, and clearly the better organizations do that. So we have a heavy weighting around customer service, so internal customer satisfaction survey process that we do.
How often do you survey?
So I believe we do 3 times a year. We're surveying, across the enterprise, anybody who's dealt with us from a transactional standpoint, a sourcing standpoint, somebody who's worked with my contracts administrator. So that's a good gauge for us to see where we're at. And again, I feel like we've had a strong team and we've done well out of that. But we want to keep monitoring that and making sure that we're paying attention to it. Spend under management or spend that we've actively looked at in any given year is something that we've pretty good at measuring. And then, as an insurance company in California, actually, we have some diversity, supply diversity requirements that we've been able to build into the goal structure. But I wouldn't say that, the goal structure is important, but I think if you can set up a good team that, trusts each other and, they'll get the job done. The goals will follow. And I found that, I don't think people are, even though they can see the goal, and making the goals visible is something that I feel really strongly about.
Yeah.
There's a couple of things as a leader that I've picked up in over the years. One is making sure that my team can access where we are at any given time from a goal standpoint, and then two is walking in, and my team will tell you this, January 2nd, knowing what our goal structure is for the year.
Not waiting till 3 months into the year.
So I feel very passionately about that somebody should enjoy the holidays, busy end of year, but then come in January 2nd and know, this is
ready to go.
This is what I got to get done this year, and that's easier said than done, of course. So that would be a key thing that I've thought about from a goal standpoint, and then not changing goals either. That's one that when I hear about that drives me crazy. It gets to June, July, and someone's like, well, I know we had this one goal, but we're gonna throw that away and change it to something else. And I know you got to evolve as a business, and you got to adapt and be flexible. But when it comes to something around goal structure, especially if it's something that your team is compensated around, then I feel very strongly in clear message that they can see on a regular basis, and not dangling the carrot and continuously moving the carrot down the road. They're
doing really well, so you're going to give them another target, or
right.
You're switching things up on them for no apparent need. Of course, if they can connect the changes to something that is changing the business, that's a different story. But change for the sake of change, or because you suddenly have a different initiative that has come down and you're like, oh, I've got to reduce my suppliers by X number, and now you've got a goal on supply reduction. Right. You didn't have that 6 months ago, so you're actually putting strategies in place which maybe were the opposite of that.
And don't get me wrong, we'll make those changes on an annual basis, right?
But just not mid-year.
Yeah, not in the middle of the year, and that'll give the team plenty of time to think about what's coming up. How do I adapt? And clearly, if there's critical things that need to get done in the year, we'll do them. They just won't be within the formal goal structure. Yeah.
Well, Mark, I want to thank you so much for joining me on the pod. The last question that I have is easy one, as I always say. That's where, if anyone listener would like to reach out, connect with you directly, where would be the best place for them to find you?
So like many, I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. I do have a bit of a rule, and you know this, Phil. Actually, I even yourself, I don't typically accept invites unless I've had some type of interaction with you. So I was fortunate enough to be able to grab lunch with you in California before you left.
Yeah, then I didn't have to feel bad that you ignored my LinkedIn request.
No, it's been a pleasure. So I'm definitely on LinkedIn, and if you want to shoot me a note through there, then we can connect outside of that.
Okay, great. Well, Mark, thank you again for joining me, and it's been a pleasure kind of learning a little bit more about your journey and the journey at AAA. So really appreciate it.
It was fantastic, and we didn't even get into any English soccer.
No, well, that's probably good, because I could spend the next half an hour lamenting about my football team and end up in tears probably by the end of it.
I'm not too far behind you.
Yeah.
Let me assure you. Thanks
a lot, Mark.
Appreciate it.
Hi there. I want to thank you for tuning in to today's podcast. You can check out all of our back catalogue at artofprocurement.com/podcast, where you can also subscribe to our newsletter to make sure that you never miss an episode. And if you found value in today's show, I'd love if you would tell a peer, or perhaps go and rate and review by going to artofprocurement.com/review. Word of mouth really is the best way to help the podcast grow, and if you're able to do either one of those things, I would truly appreciate it.